Have you ever thought that helping a stranger once could completely change your life? In a world where kindness is often mistaken for naivety, a poor girl who only meant to stop by the supermarket for a loaf of bread, at the end of the day, unexpectedly ends up saving a stranger's life. She doesn't know who he is, and she certainly doesn't know that just hours later, her life will be swept into a chain of events she wouldn't have dared to imagine, even in her wildest dreams. One person with nothing, another with everything, two worlds that should never intersect. And yet, somehow, fate brings them to the same place, at the same time. But love, or salvation, is it ever that simple? Stay with the story to the very end, because sometimes the most beautiful things don't come from perfection, but from brokenness, and how we choose to walk through it. On a colder than usual Thanksgiving night, while most of Los Angeles glowed under warm lights and echoed with laughter and reunion, the emergency department of Mercy Hill Hospital was still brightly lit, eerily quiet. Ethan Dawson, a young nurse with a silent demeanor and calloused hands from years of night shifts, was restocking the medication cabinet when the ER doors burst open. A rush of cold air swept in, followed by two paramedics pushing a gurney. On it lay an unconscious woman, dark hair in disarray, face pale, a trail of dried blood across her forehead. No ID, no identification, no one with her, one of them said quickly, voice breathless with urgency. She was found near the parking lot behind the Wilshire Grand Theater. At that moment, Ethan noticed the high-end heels torn at the back and the cashmere coat stained with mud. Details that made him pause. She didn't look like the typical homeless patients he'd seen. She used to be someone. With the quiet steadiness he was known for, Ethan pulled up his mask, leaned over the trauma bed, and began checking her vitals. Her heart was weak but steady. The laceration at her temple was deep, bone was visible. And in that moment, amid the beeping monitor and the faint clink of metal instruments, Ethan felt something different. Not because of who she was, but because, even with her eyes shut, she looked like she was fighting to live. He said nothing, simply placed a hand gently over hers and silently promised, "Whoever you are, I won't let you die quietly here." And that was how the story began, in a cold hospital room, among strangers, with an unnamed vow. The next morning, as winter sunlight filtered through the hospital window, casting a soft golden hue over the white curtain, the woman on the ER bed stirred. Ethan was replacing her the fourth bag when he noticed her eyelids flutter. He stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper, like the first wind of the season. "Can you hear me? Do you know who you are?" She blinked a few times, tried to speak, but her throat was parched, and only a raspy, unintelligible sound came out. He handed her a sip of water. She drank slowly, then, with effort, shook her head. "No, I don't remember anything." That voice, fragile as it was, carried a depth of confusion, as though the world around her had slipped from memory after a single long sleep. Ethan took a seat, keeping a distance close enough to comfort, but far enough not to alarm her. "You were brought in last night. No ID, no family. The police are investigating." She looked around, as if searching the room for a scattered memory. Her face, beautiful, pale as unwritten paper, looked both exhausted and oddly dignified. Ethan had never seen someone so fragile and yet so resilient at the same time. "I saw lights, a car. Then everything went dark." She lifted a hand to her head, her fingers brushing the bandage at her temple. The pain made her wince, her lips pressed tight to stifle a groan. Ethan gently stopped her. "Don't push yourself to remember right now. Your brain's been through serious trauma. Your body needs time." A minute of silence passed between them, not heavy, but necessary. Then she turned toward him, her voice barely above a confession. "If I don't know who I am, does that mean I'm not a person?" Ethan looked at her for a long moment, his eyes reaching the loneliness she hadn't yet realized she was carrying. "Yes, you're still a person. With worth, with feelings, with life. A name is just something that comes later." She didn't say anything else, just gave a slight nod and turned toward the window. And from that moment on, something delicate like morning mist formed between them. But it was enough to firm Ethan's resolve. Whoever she was, whatever her past, he would protect her until she found her way back to herself. A few days later, with the hospital corridor winds still whistling through the window cracks, the strange girl remained in the bed on the 7th floor, her wounds healing, but her memory still blank. Ethan visited daily, bringing warm water, some fruit, and small stories, tiny pieces of normalcy to help her feel less forgotten. That morning, as he was reviewing her chart, a nurse hurried into the room with a sealed envelope stamped from the hospital's admin office. Dr. Ethan, the police returned a few items found near the accident scene. Might help the patient remember something. Ethan nodded and accepted the small evidence bag. He turned to the nameless, ageless, rootless woman beside him and slowly opened the bag as if unfolding a piece of her past into the light. Inside was a thin gold ring, a necklace with a broken clasp, and a VIP membership card from a high-end hotel chain. The embossed name read, Olivia Grant. She stared at the card for a long time. Then suddenly, she lifted her hand to her temple. Her face contorted as if someone had yanked a memory from deep within her brain. Olivia, she whispered. And then, with a faint tremor, I think, that's my name. Ethan straightened. His voice was calm, but laced with hope. Are you sure? Not completely. But it doesn't feel strange. It feels familiar. And like a domino effect, fragmented images started flooding in. A glittering dinner table, a designer evening gown, a jazz band, and the face of a man cold, polished, but with empty eyes. She shivered slightly. Ethan noticed. He moved closer, voice steady and grounding. Don't force yourself to remember too quickly. But if that's your name, we'll follow that lead. I'll help. For a moment, her eyes searched his as if trying to decide whether this man was just a doctor or something more. A few hours later, Ethan used his internal access to search records. The name Olivia Grant appeared in the booking system of the Whitmore Hotel top floor suite. Private access, pricing beyond average means. Alongside that was a detail that couldn't be overlooked. Olivia Grant was the executive vice president of the largest real estate corporation on the East Coast. Ethan stood still in front of the screen. The girl in the torn coat, curled up in the snow just days ago, was part of the upper class. A woman who commanded hundreds of employees. Someone who lived in a world of power and control. He glanced through the glass at her now sitting quietly by the window, hugging a pillow, watching passers-by in the hallway. She didn't know who she once was, but the world hadn't forgotten. And maybe that was the most terrifying part. That afternoon, as the first chill of evening swept across the hospital corridor windows, a call came through to the office of the chief medical director. The caller didn't give a name, just a curt instruction. If Olivia Grant is there, make her disappear. She is not allowed to remember. That night, Ethan was summoned to the hospital administrator's office. The man in charge, an older gentleman named Louis, who had known Ethan since his first day on the job, spoke in a lowered voice. Ethan, I know you're devoted, but the patient in room 703, she's not an ordinary case. She's at the center of a major lawsuit linked to a shadowy investment fund. There are people, powerful people, trying to silence her. Ethan frowned, a sharp chill rising through his chest. You mean, someone wants to hurt her? Louis looked directly at him, eyes unblinking. I mean, maybe it's better if she doesn't remember anything at all. That night, Ethan sat alone in the on-call room. Olivia's file lay on the desk beside a cup of cold coffee. He didn't know exactly what he was up against, but deep in his chest, the only sound he could hear was a steady, resolute heartbeat. She cannot be left alone in this. Meanwhile, now that Olivia knew her name, she was trapped in a storm of conflicting emotions. Each night, she dreamed fragmented images, a large boardroom, voices raised in tense arguments, a contract torn in half, and a man's hand gripping her shoulder, pulling her through a crowd. One night, as Ethan was changing her bandages, she suddenly whispered, I think I was kicked out of where I lived. Ethan looked up. Are you sure? Olivia gave a small nod, her eyes glistening with tears. Someone forced me out of my own home. I remember yelling, and I was pushed out into the night. No one helped. No one believed me. Her voice faded. She didn't need to say more. Ethan understood. Not all accidents are caused by snowstorms. Some are caused by people. The next morning, Ethan decided to reach out to an old friend who worked in investigative law. When he showed him a photo of Olivia, his friend's reaction sent a chill down Ethan's spine. Jesus, that's really Olivia Grant? She disappeared 3 weeks ago. The press reported she was on leave, but people in the industry whispered that her family and the board forced her out after she uncovered a major money laundering deal. She had evidence. Then she vanished. When Ethan returned to the hospital, he found Olivia sitting by the window, writing her first words in a new notebook. "I dreamed of the ocean," she said, "but I was shivering, freezing." "Do you think that's a real memory?" Ethan sat down beside her, his voice as soft as the first breeze of spring. "Olivia, I think you're starting to remember, and that could be dangerous." She looked at him, her eyes clear, but shimmering with a pain she hadn't yet fully understood. "But I can't live as if I never existed, can I?" Ethan was silent. Then he nodded. "No, but this time, I'm going with you." And so, two people, one who used to be someone, and one who knew nothing but how to believe, began a journey. Not to reclaim the past, but to fight for the right to live truthfully as who they are. That morning, as sunlight streamed into the hospital room through cream-colored curtains faded by time, Olivia felt something different. She had just slept for nearly 6 uninterrupted hours, the longest stretch since waking up. But it hadn't been dreamless. In her sleep, she saw a face. The face of a man with a perfect smile and eyes cold as ice. She couldn't remember his name, but the feeling was as vivid as a scar yet to heal. Around midday, while Olivia was slowly walking down the hallway with a support frame, a group of people appeared at the far end. 3 men in suits. The one in the center was tall, silver-haired, well-dressed, with an aura of authority. When Olivia's eyes met his, her legs froze. No one needed to introduce him. No memories were required. She knew that man. He approached, his expression filled with false concern. "Olivia, you scared me half to death. Do you know how long I've been looking for you?" Olivia stared at him, then instinctively took a step back. Her hands gripped the sides of the walker. "You?" One word sweetly spoken, yet bitter to the core. Ethan stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of her on reflex. His voice was even, but firm. "Sorry, the patient needs rest." "Who gave you permission to come in here?" The man glanced at Ethan with clear disapproval, then turned to Olivia. His eyes darkened for a fleeting second. "You don't recognize me? I'm Vivian Grant, your sister." The entire hallway seemed to hold its breath. Olivia tried to keep calm. A chill crept up from deep in her chest. She didn't remember clearly, but in her dreams, this was the person who pushed her out. Into the rain, into the shouting, into the dark. Ethan spoke up again. "If your family, please provide verification to the administrative office. She isn't ready for prolonged interaction, especially not with unresolved memories." Vivian pressed her lips together. Clearly, she didn't like being blocked, but she didn't argue. Before turning to leave, she leaned in close to Olivia, her voice like a venomous whisper. "There are things you're better off forgetting, Olivia. Not all truths are worth remembering." Then she walked away, heels clicking sharply on the tile, echoing down the hallway long after she disappeared. That night, Olivia curled up in bed, hands wrapped around the cup of chamomile tea Ethan had made, she whispered, eyes fixed on the soft glow of the bedside lamp. "She called me her sister. But you know what's the strangest part?" Ethan turned to her. "What?" "I didn't feel safe when she showed up. Instead, I felt like a child who had once been locked outside a door. The feeling was so clear. My chest still hurts from it." Ethan sat beside her, his voice calm and steady. "Olivia, your past may be full of pain, but it doesn't own you. You have the right to choose what to remember and who to trust. And I'm here to make sure you don't go through it alone." Olivia's eyes grew quiet for a few seconds. Then she gave a small nod. For the first time, a flicker of real determination lit her gaze. Tomorrow, she would begin writing her memory. Page by page, piece by piece, no matter how much it hurt. The next morning, as the sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains, casting a warm stripe across the foot of the bed, Olivia woke with a heavy feeling in her chest. She had a dream. No, more likely a memory. A worn wooden table, a fountain pen, a small notebook, and a voice whispering close to her ear, "If I disappear, don't let anyone get this notebook, Olivia." Outside, Ethan was making coffee, its aroma filling the room. When he saw Olivia sit up, he walked in and placed a warm cup of tea on the bedside table. "Did you sleep okay?" Olivia nodded slowly. "Ethan, if I ever left something behind, something I intentionally hid, do you think someone could find it?" Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" "I'm not sure. But I see myself writing, like I was warning someone. Maybe even myself. I think I knew something. Too dangerous." That afternoon, while a nurse was cleaning out the old nightstand brought in from a different wing, While the hospital underwent renovations, something small slipped out from beneath a loose panel at the bottom of the drawer. It was a thin black leather notebook, its edges dust-covered and aged. The nurse handed it to Ethan, and the moment he placed it in Olivia's hands, her body trembled slightly. A chill ran down her spine. She opened to the first page, her own handwriting. "If someone is reading this, it means I'm no longer safe." The lines that followed were shaky and urgent. "I believe Vivian is not just my sister. She doesn't want me to remember because I know something. About the company, about the family's charity fund, the missing money, the erased names, and a death that was never reported to the police." Olivia's hands clenched the notebook. Her breath shortened. Ethan sat beside her, reading along, his brow furrowing deeply. "I'm being watched. And if I accidentally disappear, find the copy of the documents hidden in the wooden cabin behind Sable Creek Resort, second drawer on the left." Olivia looked up at him, her voice roughened by fear. "I'm not paranoid. I knew someone wanted me silenced permanently." Ethan nodded, eyes still locked on the notebook. "Sable Creek. I know where that is. But if you're right, then we don't have much time. She won't stop." Olivia nodded, and for the first time, her eyes held something stronger than fear clarity. The clarity of someone who knew that if she didn't speak up, the truth would die with her. That night, when the hospital had settled into sleep, Olivia sat by the window, the notebook cradled in her hands like a lifeline to her true self. Outside, cars glimmered beneath the dim glow of street lamps. A world seemingly at peace, unaware that its peace hung by the thin thread of one woman's resurfacing memory. By dawn the next day, with the fog still clinging to the distant pine ridges, Ethan and Olivia left the hospital. In her hand was the small, worn notebook, a map leading them to the truth long buried. Inside the car, Olivia stared through the misted window. It took nearly 2 hours to reach the outskirts of Sable Creek, a once beloved family resort now abandoned and silent. Years ago, during Thanksgiving, the place had been filled with laughter, bonfires, and warm wine, but since her parents' death, Vivian had let it fall asleep. "Are you sure it's still there?" Ethan asked cautiously, as they turned onto the dirt road leading to the property. Olivia was quiet for a moment, eyes fixed on the dense line of trees ahead. If Vivian didn't find the notebook, then maybe she hasn't come here yet. The car stopped in front of a small wooden cabin nestled between two ancient cedar trees. The roof was moss-covered, the windows clouded with dust. Everything looked frozen in time, untouched for over a decade. As Olivia stepped out of the car, a breeze carried the scent of damp wood and long-buried memories. "I remember this place," she whispered, as though speaking to herself. "I used to hide here when she yelled at me. Dad used to teach me piano in that room." They stepped inside. Under the flashlight beam, the furniture remained intact, coated in the dust of years. Ethan moved quickly to the old wooden desk in the study, just as the notebook described. Second drawer on the left. Olivia reached for it, and just as she had written it was there, a bundle of documents, carefully wrapped in moisture-proof plastic. Ethan unsealed the packet. Inside were spreadsheets, wire transfer records, and finally, printed emails. Vivian Dawson's digital signature repeated across them. Transaction after transaction money, withdrawn from the family charity fund, originally meant for underprivileged children, funneled into offshore accounts. Olivia brought a hand to her mouth. She wasn't just the victim of a scheme, she was the witness to the betrayal of her family's legacy. "She used your name to authorize the transfers," Ethan murmured. "You started investigating, and that's why you were removed." In that moment, Olivia didn't just remember who she was. She remembered why she had to survive. "I have to expose this," she said firmly, voice steady despite the emotion welling in her chest. "Not just for myself, but for those who were supposed to be helped by that money." Ethan nodded. They were no longer just running. They were returning to confront, to reclaim justice, and to rebuild from the wreckage. By late afternoon the next day, as the sky faded into a soft amber glow, Olivia and Ethan returned to the city with the documents that could unravel everything. Vivian Dawson had spent years constructing. For the first time since the accident, Olivia was no longer hiding, no longer afraid. She sat upright in the passenger seat, her gaze fixed on the towering silhouette of the Dawson Foundation, ahead a monument of lies waiting to fall. "What do you want to do first?" Ethan asked, eyes steady on the road. "I want to see her," Olivia replied, without hesitation. When they entered the lobby, Vivian Dawson was already there. Still the powerful woman in her crimson silk dress, not a wrinkle on her face, but this time there was a flicker of shock in her eyes. "Olivia?" she gasped, her voice trembling slightly before recovering its poise. You're alive?" That sentence wasn't a welcome. It was the sound of defeat, thinly veiled. Olivia stood across from the sister who had once meant the world to her, the one who used to braid her hair, who held her through the night their parents died. But now, her eyes were different. She was no longer the naive little sister who trusted blindly. She was a woman who had survived and returned with the truth. "I know what you did, to me, to our parents' foundation, to everyone who believed in your performative kindness." Vivian narrowed her eyes, a forced smile curling at the corner of her lips. "You don't have any proof." Ethan stepped forward and laid the stack of documents on the cold marble counter in the lobby. The silence was so sharp, even the click of a passing assistant's heels echoed, followed by a retreat sensing the weight of what was unfolding. Vivian opened the file. She skimmed a few pages. Her hand froze. She pulled out a transfer record from the charity fund to a private Swiss account. The signature, Olivia Dawson. "You forged my name," Olivia said. "You made me disappear so no one could investigate. But you forgot one thing." Her voice grew steadier, her eyes lit with quiet fire. "The betrayed don't go down so easily, especially when they've still got a debt to collect." Vivian gripped the file tighter. Her lips trembled. All her life, she had wielded charm and intelligence to bend people to her will. But now, the one person she had underestimated was the one pushing her back. "What do you want?" Vivian's voice was cold, laced with a sliver of fear. "Justice," Olivia replied. "For the truth to come out, for you to resign, and finally, I want to see you walk out of this building as the failure you are." Ethan looked at her. In that moment, he didn't just see a woman who had survived a car crash. He saw someone who had become a symbol of courage reclaimed, of a heart once broken now beating strong again. Vivian said nothing. She turned. Her perfectly styled curls swayed with each step, and Olivia knew the battle was over. There was no need for revenge, no need for threats. Vivian had already lost the moment she betrayed the only person who had ever loved her unconditionally. The next morning, sunlight slipped gently through the curtains, brushing Olivia's cheek. She woke up in a small apartment in East Village, the same place she had rented back in college. Worn, simple, but warm enough to hold the memories she had once scattered while chasing someone else's expectations. She no longer lived in a cold penthouse. No more fake charity galas. No more polished project plans bearing the Dawson Foundation logo while hiding deception underneath. She was living now, truly living as herself. Ethan walked in, 2 cups of hot coffee in hand, a wool sweater draped over one shoulder. He set a cup down in front of her, eyes soft. "No longer Miss Dawson the executive, huh?" Olivia smiled faintly. Not sad, not regretful, just a light smile, like late autumn sun. "I never really was her, Ethan. I just spent years trying to become someone else's shadow." Since Vivian's resignation, the media had erupted over the financial scandals at Dawson Foundation. A full investigation was launched. Suspicious funds, fake projects, everything was exposed. But Olivia didn't stay to watch her sister fall from grace. She didn't need to prove anything anymore. She had learned the greatest lesson. Justice isn't just about exposing lies. It's about rediscovering what's right within yourself. And the right thing was starting over, on her own terms. Weeks later, under a light, misty rain, Olivia returned to a small shopping strip in Brooklyn. She stepped into the old bookstore where she had once interned as a college student. Roger, the owner, an elderly man with a beard like winter snow, froze when he saw her. "Goodness, Olivia? How many years has it been?" She smiled, took off her sunglasses, and nodded politely. "I'd like to work here again. I don't need a big paycheck, just a place to begin again with things that actually matter." Roger looked at her for a long moment, then quietly placed a familiar key in her hand. "Then start with that first shelf. Sort out the forgotten ones, just like you used to." That evening, as the bookstore closed and lights dimmed, Olivia stood by the window, watching people pass under the street lamps. Beside her, Ethan sat reading an old paperback novel, leg crossed, still holding a half-eaten biscuit. Olivia leaned her head gently on his shoulder. "I never thought a simple cup of coffee, a slow afternoon, or a quiet little bookstore could make me feel whole." Ethan squeezed her hand lightly. Turns out, happiness isn't about how much money you have. It's about how you choose to live once everything fake is gone. Olivia closed her eyes. In that moment, she knew she was no longer the woman who had been betrayed and cast out of a glamorous life. She was the woman who had walked out of the dark and lit the way for herself. And to her, that was the most radiant kind of victory. 3 months later, as the last snow began melting on Brooklyn rooftops, Olivia received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was calm, low, and confident. "Miss Olivia Dawson, this is Rachel Kim, representative of Phoenix Aid." Olivia was sitting in her old armchair, halfway through a book on nonprofit sociology. At the mention of Phoenix Aid, her heart skipped. It was the name of an independent global organization renowned for its transparency and real impact. It was what she had once dreamed of becoming back when she was just a perfect image at the Dawson Foundation. "Yes, I'm listening," Olivia replied. Her voice was calm, but her heart fluttered slightly. "Rachel didn't waste time. We've been following the situation with the Dawson Foundation. And frankly, we were impressed by how you stepped away. You didn't seek attention. You didn't shift blame. You disappeared quietly, and then started again at a used bookstore." Olivia's grip tightened slightly on the book in her hands. Under the soft light of the late afternoon, memories stirred of heartbreak, disillusionment, and rebirth. "So, why are you calling me?" she asked. There was a pause on the other end. Then Rachel spoke slowly, deliberately. "Phoenix Aid is opening a new branch in New Jersey. We'd like to invite you to become our first director of community programs. This project needs someone who understands the true value of trust and who's been hurt by it too." Olivia didn't answer right away. Inside her, two parts of herself were warring. One side was the peace she had found with Ethan. The other, the calling of long-buried dreams. That night, as the two of them sat on a wooden bench on the porch, Olivia told Ethan everything about the conversation. He didn't respond at first, just stared out at the flickering streetlights like falling stars. After a long while, he finally spoke, voice low and steady. "The world hurt you once, but you also once wanted to change it. Now you have the chance. You're scared, aren't you?" She nodded softly. "I'm afraid I'll lose myself again. I'm afraid I'll lose you." Ethan took her hand in his, held it firmly. "I love who you are now, and I love the woman brave enough to walk away from everything fake. I don't want to hold you back, not if that's the only way to keep you. And if I leave," she whispered, "then I'll wait for you. As long as you promise no matter how far you go, you won't lose your heart again." Olivia looked up at him. In his eyes, she didn't see blind belief. She saw a kind of faith forged through fire, steady, sincere. She didn't need to think anymore. "I promise." And for the first time in years, standing at a crossroad, she didn't feel lost. 3 weeks later, Olivia stood in front of Phoenix Aid's new headquarters in New Jersey. Not a gleaming glass tower like Dawson Foundation had owned, but a weathered red brick building that used to be a public library, now transformed into a community center. She took a deep breath, stepped inside, and felt it clearly this time. Her steps didn't shake. From her first day as director of community programs, Olivia didn't sit behind a sleek desk with boutique coffee or drown in emails. She spent the first hour of every day picking up trash. With the staff, with volunteers, with the unhoused folks coming in for breakfast support. "She's the director?" A young person with messy blue-dyed hair whispered from a distance. Olivia smiled. Not the polished, practiced smile from her old life, but a real one. Simple, approachable. "Director, sure. But not a queen, kid," she said, as she kept wiping down tables with rolled-up sleeves. And slowly, the atmosphere in the center changed. People began calling her not with distance, but with warmth. "Sister Olivia, Miss O," the chill director. One late afternoon, while Olivia was sitting with a group of teens who had been suspended from school, helping them revise their resumes, she received an email. Sender, Nathaniel Dawson. Subject, about a conversation. The message was brief. "Olivia, I'm in New York. I need to see you. Just once." She stared at the screen. Part of her wanted to delete it immediately. Another part of her felt strangely calm. 3 days later, they met not in a boardroom, but in a small cafe filled with laughter and the warm scent of cinnamon waffles. Nathaniel was still Nathaniel, expensive suit, glinting watch, but his eyes were different, tired, lonely. You've changed," he said after a long silence. Olivia lifted her coffee cup and replied softly, "No, I've just finally become myself. Nathaniel sighed. Do you know why I needed to see you? Dawson Foundation is collapsing. Jonathan Reed has been convicted, but the foundation's reputation is in ruins. You're the only one whose name still holds enough credibility to save it. Olivia rested her hand lightly on the table. She wasn't shocked. She wasn't angry. Just a little sad. You don't really care about me. You just need a name to rebuild the wreckage you left behind. Nathaniel opened his mouth to protest, then stopped. Olivia continued, but I'll help. Not for you. For the people who once believed in Dawson Foundation. The ones who were betrayed. The ones who were hurt like I once was. Nathaniel looked at her, truly looked, and for the first time, he wasn't a man of power. He was someone facing the reality of what he'd lost. After that meeting, Olivia made a proposal. The Dawson Foundation would no longer carry the Dawson name. It would be transferred fully to Phoenix Aid as a special branch, under a new name, the Rising House, a home for those who have fallen, but choose to rise again. And so it was. No more lavish headquarters, no more flashy media events. Only hot meals for the unhoused, vocational classes for single mothers, and teenagers who were finally called by name, not by file number. Olivia stood among them all, knowing she hadn't just found her way back to the world she once left. She had changed it. One late autumn afternoon, with the last golden leaves clinging to the sidewalk, Olivia stood outside the old bookstore tucked beside Central Park, the one where she and Ethan had once spent hours talking about the things no one pays attention to. The door still creaked the same way, and Ethan was there. No leather jacket, no cocky defiance, just a man who had weathered a season without her, and waited. She stepped inside, a little slow, but certain. Ethan looked up from the book in his hands. His gaze lingered on her longer than usual. So, you finally came back? His voice low, half hope, half guarded. Olivia sat across from him, took off her scarf, and met his eyes. I think. I needed time to figure out who I was before I could stand next to someone without feeling small. Ethan smiled gently. That look's still the one that made her feel safe. Like no matter how far she wandered, there would always be a way home. So, do you know now? He asked, not expecting a perfect answer. Just an honest one. Olivia nodded. She didn't need to say more. They sat there, among the old books, among pages that had yellowed with time, among things once left unfinished. After a while, Ethan tilted his head and asked, Do you still have that bracelet from Sister Lan? Olivia smiled and reached into her coat pocket, pulling out the old bracelet, just 3 simple beads. One of them had faded with time, but she had never taken it off. I still have it. Like I still hold on to the old promise. That happiness is something you have to protect, with your own hands, day by day. Ethan didn't say anything more. He simply reached out his hand, and this time, Olivia didn't hesitate. That night, during a quiet ceremony held at the Rising House, no stage lights, no television cameras, Olivia stood beside women who had once been homeless, addicted, hopeless, and were now teaching others how to cook. Ethan sat in the back row, watching her in silence, as if witnessing someone rise from ashes without needing a crown to prove she was worthy. I used to live in the shadow of myself, Olivia said, her eyes sweeping across every face. But it was the people here who taught me something. Not everyone needs saving. Sometimes, you just need someone who believes you're worth saving yourself. Applause followed. But Ethan knew this wasn't about inspiration. This was her closing an old chapter and opening a new one. And in this new chapter, she wasn't someone running. She was someone leading. 1 year later, spring in New York felt unusually warm. Golden light draped across the skylight of the Rising House, a center for the dignity and rehabilitation of homeless women, survivors of abuse, and those with difficult pasts. In the open kitchen on the ground floor, the sounds of chopping, laughter, and children's babbling blended like a symphony of life returning. At the end of the kitchen line, Olivia was guiding 3 young women through the steps of making an Italian-style sandwich. Her hands moved with precision, but her eyes were gentle, watching each student carefully. No one would have guessed that only a year ago, she was someone who had nearly lost all faith in herself. She was no longer the woman who met a billionaire at the supermarket, as the media once dubbed her. She was the founder and director of Olive Path, a sustainable, self-reliant community initiative built not on charity, but on the inherent value of people. Ethan entered just as a loaf of bread came out of the oven. He wore a rolled-up shirt and, out of habit, cleaned the stove glass when he was tense-something. Olivia always noticed. They didn't need many words, just a glance, a nod, that was enough. Ethan was no longer the global CEO, as people once called him. He still ran his company, but the course of his life had shifted. Now, most of his time was with Olive Path leading free therapy sessions, family reconciliation circles, and walking alongside people who thought they had lost their last chance. That evening, as the city lights began to glow, Olivia and Ethan stood side by side on the rooftop. A breeze drifted by, carrying the scent of jasmine from the balcony and the distant hum of traffic below. "Do you think we're done?" Ethan asked, his fingers lacing through hers. Olivia smiled softly and shook her head. "No, but I think we've come far enough to know happiness doesn't come from having everything. It comes from not losing yourself when everything falls away." Ethan stayed quiet, like he always did, when she said something he knew he'd replay in his mind for years to come. Down below, a few young women sat in a circle, learning basic financial literacy. Some had battled addiction. Some had worked low-wage jobs in diners. Some had lost custody of their children. Now, they were learning how to begin again, one small step at a time. And Olivia, who had once been thrown out of her own home for no fault of her own, was now the one handing others the key she once searched so desperately for, a second chance. The lesson of this story: not everyone born into poverty stays there, and not everyone born into wealth understands why they're even alive. It was love, not the fairy tale kind, but the steady, brave kind that dares to face pain that changed them. The story between Olivia and Ethan isn't a fairy tale. It's a journey from collapse to rebirth, from misunderstanding to acceptance, from being different to walking side by side, and above all, from needing to be saved to becoming strong enough to save others. If you've ever felt not enough, unworthy, or out of chances, remember this: you don't need to be perfect to begin. You just need to begin, to slowly become whole. Thank you for following this story to the very end. And if it touched something within you, please share it, so one more person out there can believe they too deserve to begin again.